We're live. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope everyone is well this evening, inshallah. Today I'm joined by right-wing political activist and practicing Christian, Jayda Fransen. How are you, Jayda? I don't think I've actually asked you how you are yet. I hope you're well.
I'm well, thank you. I'm so sorry to you and your viewers because I had a technical issue. I literally repel technology. Like if I get near it, it stops working. And anyway, I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much for having me on.
No, thank you for joining me this evening. Thank you for taking the time out to have a discussion with me. We're going to address some controversial topics that I think need to be discussed in order for us to hopefully find some common ground and mutual solutions. But before that, I sort of want the viewers to get to know you on a human level without any prejudice from your past or with you being stereotyped, because everything is nuanced, which will unfold as we go on. But could you briefly go into your upbringing in South London and how you got involved in right-wing activism?
Yeah, so I grew up in Southeast London, and it was good. I mean, I was born in '86, so the '90s for me are like the nostalgic era.
Yeah,
that's the era that I remember. Just everyone got along. There wasn't all the crazy that's going on at the moment. I mean, really, things have gone absolutely insane, especially in the last 5 to 10 years. I would say that we've lost the plot entirely, but it's biblical. I mean, I believe that everything's happening because it's going to. But yeah, it was a good upbringing. It wasn't a particularly mixed area at that point when I was growing up, but it was somewhat multicultural. It's different now, of course, and I don't live in London anymore. But yeah, it was just a normal kind of working class upbringing, and then I got into right-wing politics, I guess, well, through activism. So I just have to put this out there now, and it sounds absurd because I'm the leader of a party, but I absolutely despise politics. I've never been politically motivated. I got into politics because I got into activism, and then I kind of realized that if you want a platform, if you want to reach large audiences, then using the political system, which is completely corrupt anyway and rigged, but using that can help you reach large numbers of people. So I would say that my entry into right-wing activism was following the murder of Lee Rigby, and then it kind of progressed from group to group, and it went from there.
I mean, I don't remember much about that incident. I was younger, but I do remember bits of it, and it was horrific, and I can understand why that would motivate some people to go into that sort of path. But to be honest, being born in Britain, I can relate to some parts of your upbringing, being working class and being around and everybody being happy and getting along. Even though we're all from different races and religions, and the fact that I have an additional culture as part of my childhood. I went to a school that was multicultural, everybody got on, and I'll be honest, in the UK I never experienced racism growing up until one incident recently, after all sort of the Israel stuff kicked off. But being visibly Muslim now, with a hijab and on my own, it does make me think that I need to be more cautious now. I do think about it when I go out and about. And even more so now with the riots that have been happening up and down the UK, which is insane. But apart from that, I've mostly had positive experiences with, white British people most of my life. I've been around them all my life, university, working and things like that. But what were your thoughts on Islam growing up? Did you have negative experiences with Muslims that you interacted with?
Not particularly. There weren't actually many. I don't think there were any Muslims in my primary school. So we're going back a long way.
No.
But I don't think there were any Muslims in my primary school. I was in a class of, say, 30 students, and in the class there was one black boy and one black girl, and everyone else was white. And so when I say that Southeast London has changed, I mean, it really has in quite a short space of time. I just want to quickly say something, just going back to what you said a minute ago about how since the riots you felt a little bit more guarded, maybe a bit cautious. The sad reality is that there are so many people from, I think, like all walks of life, including white Brits, I will say, that now feel cautious about where they go, and that might not be necessarily because white Brits are worried that they're going to be attacked by a Muslim gang, but there's a lot of I feel like there's a lot of gang culture that just generally everybody, we're just in this really heightened sort of violent state, which I think the have got us all into. So I just wanted to say, because it saddens me to hear that people feel cautious when they're out. Like I just hate hearing that. But I just want you to know that it's not. I mean, not that this is any consolation, but this is not like a thing that's isolated to you. I think we've been pushed into this state where so many people feel like that, and it's manufactured. Anyway, I've totally lost what I was.
No,
totally lost what I was. Oh yeah,
no, it's
about Muslim
you
students.
say that. It's interesting you say that, because when I go out and about, I think when people are looking at me that they think I'm a weirdo, and maybe they think the same about, like, you know, maybe they think that I'm looking at them because they're strange, and it's probably we're all in this fear era, like you said. It is, yeah, it's sad.
Yeah, and I think obviously because you're you're wearing, would this be classed as a
niqab?
A niqab. So because you're wearing the niqab and you're visibly Muslim, and of course, you know, living in Britain and living during, and I suppose around the times of the riots, you're just going to be more conscious of people looking at you. I was I'll just tell you this story. Just, I mean, again, it's just so that you can maybe see that it's not just you. Like, I get people look at other people strangely, and sometimes they don't even realize they're doing it. But if you're in a heightened state of caution, then maybe you're perceiving it the wrong way. But sometimes I don't think you are. You know, I'm not saying that at all. I was on Sunday, I came out of church, and it was raining, which is usual. Like, it rains every single day here, but it was raining, and I had I wear a veil in church. I wear a mantilla, and I had it sort of round my neck, because I'm not, so in the Bible, women are told that we're to cover our head when we pray, and so I wasn't praying, so I had it around my neck, and it was hammering down with rain, and I had no umbrella and I had no hood, and I thought, okay, let me just put this mantilla up, because it's just about the only bit of protection that I'm going to get from the rain. And there was this young fella that was walking down the street, and he looked at me quite strangely. He looked at me, and I thought for a split second, I thought, because, you know, not a lot of Christian women cover, and that we don't cover outside of church. You know, I think a lot of Christian women are going back to traditional Christian values and covering in church, but we don't cover outside of church. And I think he looked at me and was just a bit confused, and he looked a bit bewildered. And I suppose, you know, these days, if you see a lady in a mantilla, she's probably like 30 years older than me, right? They're usually like little, you know, little women from the continent. So I get it. Like, we're all just working our way through all of this. We all are. But yeah, so sorry, I digressed a bit there, but I just wanted to share that with you, because I think sometimes it's, on a human level, it's important that we don't maybe isolate ourselves as well, and fall into the constructed category of despised or hated, because there are plenty of people out there that don't feel that way about you, you know. But yeah, so growing up, there weren't many Muslims where I lived. There were a few girls in the secondary school that I went to, and I use that term relatively loosely because I didn't really stay in school for long, and they were Somalian heritage, but I didn't bother with school, really. I didn't take anything to do with those girls, so I didn't have any negative experiences with Muslim. I didn't have really any experiences with Muslims.
Did you know much about Islam growing up? I mean, did you know, because a lot of people that I speak to, they talk about mainstream media, and that was their only sort of get into when it comes to Islam. Did you know much about it? Did you know much about the religion?
No, I was young when, well, I say I was young. I was a nipper still when 9/11 happened, and I remember just watching that in horror. And of course, you know, today's the anniversary. It's 23 years ago. I would have been 15. And then I think really the first time I started becoming intrigued about Islam was the 7/7 bombings. And at that point, I was still relatively young, and I was working in London. And of course, because the attacks happened in London, even though London is huge, everybody just went into this heightened state of panic, because it wasn't something that we were used to. And sadly, now we have almost become hardened to these attacks. You know, like we see it in the news, and it's like, oh, there's been another terrorist attack, and people say, oh, it's anybody, you know. And I think that is a real shame that throughout Europe, there was a period where it felt like they were just every week. And but at 7/7, we weren't in that position. So I was kind of thinking, well, after the initial shock and ringing everybody that I knew to check if they were all right, even though London is huge. Again, most of the people I knew weren't going to be in that area, but you just go into this panic. And I remember like driving to work for weeks and weeks afterwards. None of our cars, we wouldn't get anywhere near a bus, because we were like, oh, in case the bus, it was just a horrible thing. And so that made me think, okay, I need to look into this a little bit. And then a few years later, after Lee Rigby, I remember going home, and the TV was on, and it was muted, and Michael Bellagio was on the screen and his hands were red, and I thought he had like gloves on, and he had this kind of meat cleaver thing in his hand, and I was thinking, like, what is this? Because he said it was the news. I was just like, what am I watching? And I unmuted it, and this footage just shocked me because he was saying that he was giving his reasons for doing this, and he quoted the Quran, and he also referred to, you know, what's going on in, you know, geopolitical issues, and I was just horrified. And so my instinct was, okay, I need to know what the book says. So that really was so it came from a very, very, I want to say hostile, but yeah, I guess hostile place. Like when I first started researching Islam, it was to try and find out why these atrocities had happened in the name of that ideology. Yeah. So that was, sadly, you know, that was my introduction to Islam. Before that, I had no idea. We didn't know anything about it, you know.
And that's really sad to me as a Muslim that it was your introduction into Islam, because it's not Islam, you know, as we know. And when things like that happen, I mean, for me and my family and every Muslim that I know, the first thing that people think is, please don't let it be a Muslim. Please don't say anything to do with the Quran. Please don't use God's name in what you've done, because it's got nothing to do with it. And I actually think it hurts us just as much, maybe more than it does anybody else, because people are using something that is so, you know, precious to us and using that to do these atrocities. But I think there are good and bad people in every race and religious background. And from what I find is that people who are involved in criminal activity or degeneracy, they're not practicing their religion properly, or not at all in some cases. And that goes for grooming gangs, Jimmy Savile, R. Kelly, you know, people that are involved in those types of horrible crimes. They're not close to God, and they're not practicing Islam or Christianity. And for me, I don't see it as a race and religion thing. I think creeps come from all backgrounds, and they are in need of religious guidance. If that's what I think, for definite.
I think, you know, and also I've sort of identified, because I'm just intrigued, and I'm quite enjoying the new situation I find myself in, which is where I have sort of opened up, I guess, myself to debating, or not necessarily even debating as such, but speaking to people, engaging with people from other walks of life. And I've been doing that lately. And one of the things that has come out of that is one of the things that I've realized, and it followed a question that I asked on social media, on Twitter, about the Tate brothers. Actually, it just kind of followed on from there. But there is this kind of situation that I think Muslims find themselves in, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but this is just something that I've kind of I've noticed, and from inquiring of Muslims, this has been confirmed, is that in your faith, it seems to me that, or has been confirmed to me, that if one declares themselves to be a Muslim and says the Shahada, then they are accepted as a Muslim. And of course, none of us are perfect. No human being is perfect. And so I understand that your belief is that essentially nobody knows a person's heart other than God, or you would say Allah, and therefore you have to take someone at their word. It's not for you to question their statement of faith, their proclamation of faith, and therefore I suppose you have people that are doing deeds under the umbrella of your faith, claiming to be a member of your community or a member of your faith and ideology, that you might inwardly, maybe you're not saying it because, you know, you're told that you're to kind of accept people's profession of faith, and that's between them and God. But you kind of, I see this as people under that umbrella having just been taken from the Muslim community. And to be honest, Tate is an example of this, in my opinion, who have made a declaration that they are a Muslim, and therefore they are accepted as a Muslim. And therefore, if they do something publicly under that banner, the label is a Muslim did this, a Muslim groomer did that, a Muslim terrorist did that, a Muslim pimp did that, whatever, right? And so the difference that I have found, and this is a kind of theological issue, but the difference that I have found with Christianity is that we are actually told to judge in righteous judgment. The Bible's often misquoted, judge not, but it goes on to say, lest ye be judged basically by your own standard, you know, judge others by the same standard that you would uphold. And so we can confidently say, I don't think he ever did, but had Jimmy Savile ever claimed that he was a Christian, we have a very clear guidance and very clear blueprint, I guess, for how Christians behave. And he did not conform. And we're not in this situation. And forgive me, like, I don't want to sound like I'm being patronizing, but I do actually kind of feel a bit sorry for people that are, like, I speak to people sometimes and they say, oh, Jayda, you know, don't take that guy as a Muslim. He's you know, he said a lot of stuff that would be considered a heresy or worse, or shirk, I guess you would say. And so, but for Christians, sometimes we are called judgmental because we say, well, that person isn't a Christian, and we say it with like confidence, but that's because there are certain values that have to be upheld and certain acts that have to be displayed. And if we don't see that, like, regenerate new heart that's been given to someone once they've received the Holy Spirit, we can confidently say, we're calling you out on this. You're not a Christian. Don't use our faith. And again, that's kind of going off on a tangent, but I just thought I'd share that with you because I think that must be kind of difficult, I guess, for the Muslim community.
No, it is difficult. And I think in terms of Andrew Tate and people of that like, I think you're right. When someone takes a shahada, they are a Muslim. We consider them a brother and a sister, and their relationship in terms of faith is between them and God. But it's all about intention with Islam, right? It's all about intention. We get told you get rewarded a lot more with the intention to pray as well as praying. So, you know, if that's in your mind. But with people like the Tate brothers, with people like Andrew Tate, don't think that he gets off lightly. You know, Muslims rip him a lot. Muslims are, and it's it's not to be disrespectful. It's to, you know, you have to call each other out on these things. I get called out.
Brotherly love.
And you have to, because if you don't, sometimes people don't know certain things. People that are new Muslims might not know certain things. He is a relatively new Muslim. He's a revert. So there might be things that he doesn't know. And yes, it does hurt you when people do things publicly. But again, it's between them and God. And I do respect what you're saying about, you know, people, if Jimmy Savile said he was a Christian, I don't think he was. But yeah, he would be he would be told he wasn't a Christian. So I definitely understand where you're coming from, but
because I think it's been weaponized, right? This is the point, and this is what I've been giving consideration to. Is I think that this has been weaponized, and I see it weaponized on both sides quite often, because, like, so white Brits who aren't, in my opinion, are not practicing Bible believing Christians, but maybe identify as Christians, because there's a thing called our Christian identity, and I get that. I mean, I'm that's preferable to atheism, because I think if you take on the ideals and the traditions of Christianity like we used to in this country, we'd be in a far better place than we are now, which is total degeneracy. But people that aren't actually walking with the Lord and walking in their faith, I see them weaponize the fact that someone has declared themselves to be a Muslim, someone is ostensibly living as a Muslim, maybe living wearing traditional Muslim garments, they commit an act which is atrocious, like a grooming gang member or a terrorist, or you know, that kind of stuff. And then so therefore the Muslim term is applied before the next, so it would be Muslim groomer, Muslim terrorist. And I've seen when I've put posts up about stuff to kind of just explore this a bit more, because I have a lot more Muslim followers on social media now. Some of them come back. If the post kind of goes a bit wild, you get people from other parts of the world that haven't engaged with me lately, and they just assume that I'm being hostile, which I'm not. But they'll come back and say, oh, well, you know, you've got, what about your Christian groomers like Jimmy Savile? And so again, I look at that and I think, well, yes. So what they're doing is they're looking at the entire white British community and assuming that they're all Christian, which they're not, and taking them at their word for that, because you do get a lot of people stomping through the streets declaring themselves to be Christians, and I have no doubt in my mind that they've never read the Bible. And so I think that the whole thing's been weaponized on both sides, and it's now become a thing like that we attack each other with, which is sad, really.
Yeah, and what we should be doing is actually going, this person doesn't represent my faith, this person doesn't represent my faith, they are their own person and they've made their own mistakes or done their own atrocities, and they should be held accountable instead of us attacking each other. I definitely think that there's a lot of hatred just now, and you know, sort of speaking about that sort of topic, you were one of the co-leaders of a far-right organisation called Britain First, which you left now around 5-6 years ago, and they did have a very negative reputation as an extremist group. Can I ask, why did you leave Britain First? Why did you leave the organisation and then start the Freedom Party?
Oh gosh, a number of reasons, really. But okay, so politically, or in terms of activism, the group wasn't going in the direction that I wanted it to go in. I did make quite a significant amount of headway, I would say, humbly. I mean, I don't mean that with any kind of, I'm not propping myself up here, but in terms of pushing what I thought was important, which was the Christian agenda, I really tried to push that to the forefront of the movement, and that wasn't being done when I joined. So in that sense, yes, there was some movement there, and there were issues that I was like told I wasn't allowed to talk about, because I realized, after a while, that really the group was just sort of homing in on one issue and willing to disregard all of the others, which I think is just insane. So a lot of issues that really meant a lot to me, like the LGBT agenda, abortion, I was really being told, look, you need to zip it about this stuff. And even to a certain extent, civic nationalism, because I'm not a civic nationalist, I'm an ethno-nationalist. And I was told, look, no, you have to sort of toe the party line, so to speak. So politically, it wasn't going in the direction I tried for years, and there was some headway made, but it wasn't going to go the way that I wanted it to. And that was fine. I mean, there wasn't really any real animosity about that stuff. I just was watching the progress, and I thought, this has sort of hit a wall, and this is as far as we're going to go with this. And it did sort of involve a lot of baseless Christianity, or like proclamations of Christianity that I felt weren't being propped up with genuine faith. So that was an issue. But I think it's been widely reported, and there are legal proceedings that are ongoing. So, but I think it's been widely reported that the main reason I left was because within the party, within the leadership, there was myself and another individual, and there was like a years and years of violence and coercive control, and just really not very nice circumstances that I found myself in. And so I'll share this with you because your viewers might find it interesting. But I remember when I got sent to prison. I got sent to prison in March 2018, and they put me in segregation because they said that some of the people upstairs, there were women upstairs that had been convicted of Islamic extremism, and they were concerned that we were going to lock horns, and they said, there's a threat to your life, and potentially, depending on how you behave, there's a threat to theirs. And so they said, we're putting you in down the block. And I spent 6 weeks down the block, which is quite an experience because you're in solitary confinement, and 6 weeks of solitary confinement is taxing on anyone. But anyway, I got into the cell, and they shut the door, and I laid on the bed. And of course, you've got no mobile phone, so you've got no social media. At that time, I had like 3 million followers on social media. Everything I did, we filmed it, we put it online. That was the whole point, was document your activism so that people can see what's going on. And all of a sudden, I found myself in just complete, solitude, silence. And I laid on the bed, and I thought, I feel freer in this jail cell than I have felt for the last 5 years. And I realized in that moment that I had to leave. And it was with a heavy heart, because I met some absolutely fantastic and sincere people along that journey. And some of them I'm still in contact with, and they are just wonderful, wonderful people, devout Christians, lovely people. But in the large part, for me, the experience was behind the scenes was so toxic and so damaging that it was a relief to be incarcerated, because I was forcibly removed from that situation that I didn't feel I could get out of. So yeah, that was my exit. And then setting up the British Freedom Party was complete fluke, really. I guess nobody could have foreseen COVID. COVID happened. We're all looking around thinking, oh my goodness, this is like something this is like an Orwellian nightmare. And I saw people were being unlawfully harassed and fined and even imprisoned for breaking these regulations that weren't even law. And so I come from a background in law, so I set up the British Freedom Movement, which was basically an advocacy service for anyone. I said, it doesn't matter whether you're black, you're white, you're left, you're right. I don't care. If you're being harassed, you're being persecuted, I will represent you for free. We set up this advocacy service, and I didn't realize how many people were going to say, yeah, can we have some help? Because it went wild. And then it morphed into a party, and here we are.
And that's good. And let's not talk about COVID. That was a crazy time, I think, in everybody's life. But sort of going back to your Britain First days, it must have been quite hard for you to leave, because I can imagine being in that situation, especially for that length of time. It's not just something that you do to walk out the door. Did you find it hard to actually take that step? Did you think about, what am I going to do next? Where am I going to go? You know, leaving behind all of that activism, you sort of built your brand around that. So that must have been quite hard.
Yeah. And the added issue was that I had been sort of maneuvered into this position where, on a personal level, I just didn't feel capable of leaving this situation. And I haven't really spoken about any of this publicly, to be honest, but maybe because we're both female, it's a bit easier. But yeah, I think on a personal level, I had been told by other people and encouraged by other people on numerous occasions to get out of the situation that I was in, because it was evident to many people what was going on. I just didn't feel like I could, because I'd kind of been, I guess that's the whole point of like coercive controlling circumstances, is that you just wholly believe that you cannot survive outside of them. And then the added pressure was being applied. And I think that this was just really strengthening the whole control element, in that I was someone who had kind of risen to prominence in the country and in the right wing, and also outside of the United Kingdom, with the Donald Trump retweets and stuff in Europe. And so I was living at one point under death threat, and I had like special measures put on my home and on my person by a counter-terror police, because they said there's a credible threat that you're going to be killed and all of this stuff. And so that was also been like leveraged against me. Like, look, you're this my whole life has been just wild, right? It's been wild because I grew up in Southeast London. I had a nice childhood. I had a good upbringing. I ended up, through just unforeseen circumstances, living in a homeless shelter when I was in my teens. And then the most unlikely event of all was that I landed a job in a law firm and decided to study law, practice law. And yeah, I could have gone either way, right? I could have gone into a life of just criminality or, you know, real unlucky circumstances, but God had other plans for me. And so I ended up practicing law. And then, you know, I was on the property ladder very young, and it was everything seemed to be just this whirlwind of, wow, I can't even believe that I'm here myself. And I walked away from that. I mean, I wasn't practicing law when I joined Britain First. I had my own recruitment consultancy, but it was a lucrative business. I was very comfortable. I lived in London and I didn't really want for anything. I worked hard, and I literally walked away from all of that because I felt so strongly about the cause that I had entered, which was this right-wing activism. And I did so from a Christian standpoint, which is why I think I was willing to walk away from everything, is because that's the only thing that can justify that. And so here you are, this marked woman who has completely tarnished her name in any of those sort of industries. Like, I couldn't go into a law firm and say, "Do you want to hire me?" Like, can you imagine? So this was all being leveraged, used as leverage against me to say, look, you can't go, you cannot leave. But that is not to say, I have to be very clear here, that is not to say that I didn't believe in the activism that I was engaged in. I do think that a lot of it was, I think I could have gone a different way about a lot of things. And I think when I think of some of the exchanges that were caught on camera and put out into the public domain, and they weren't particularly I think they could have been handled better, right, on both sides. Like, I think there was just a lot of bitterness and what have you. And I don't think that's the right way to go about things. But I was a lot younger. I mean, you're early 20s, you're thrust into this limelight, and all of a sudden, all this stuff is happening. So, yeah, it's a strange progress, but it took for me to be forced into a situation where I was away from that group to realize, okay, I cannot go back. Like, this is it now. I knew I could kind of see this window of opportunity, and I thought, I have to take this and I have to get out of this. It's scary, really, kind of scary.
Yeah, but then again, we believe, and I'm sure you believe in some ways, that God has a plan for you, and that was part of your plan, and that helped you get out of that situation. I just want to say, Brother Dilly Hussein is in the chat. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Dilly Hussein, and he's also saying greetings to you, Jayda.
Hi, Dilly. Dilly's a good egg. We had a good chat.
Yes, I know you did. I did see bits and pieces of it, so
it was very long. I don't expect you to watch all of it. If anybody did watch all of it, then God bless you, because I appreciate you taking all that time out to do so. And then they took it down from YouTube, so
I know,
we won't repeat the things that we repeated in that chat.
No, I think sometimes having these chats are important, but obviously there's a bigger agenda to avoid this happening, as we know. But going back to sort of your Britain First days, I just want to sort of just a little bit talk about, the things I heard about Britain First were mostly negative, and their leader, Paul Golding, does them no favours with the anti-Muslim propaganda that he puts out there. And, like you were saying about the domestic abuse and the coercive control that you face, and like we said, on a women-to-women basis, taking race and religion out of it, what you went through was horrific and inexcusable, and no women should be going through that. And I just want to, if anybody's watching that is maybe going through that situation or finds themselves in that situation, Jayda, what would you say to them, and how would you say to them to get out of that situation if they find themselves in that unfortunate circumstance?
Oh, gosh. Because I felt like such a hypocrite, because I was working with grooming gang victims whilst all of this was going on. And some of these girls had been subjected to horrific torture over years, and they were going and taking the stand against their abusers. And I was supporting them through that process whilst I wasn't really acknowledging that I was going through. Now, I'm not likening my experience to that entirely, but there were overlapping characteristics, certainly. And so I wouldn't give anybody the absolute blueprint. The first thing I would say is, if anybody is in that situation, and I mean anybody, because let me clarify that when I was campaigning against, in the past, I have campaigned against what I perceived in years gone by as oppressive treatment of women that were living in your community under Islam. And that was coming from a pure place. I genuinely mean anyone who's going through that, feel free to contact me. I'm not an expert in this, right? But I'm here and I would help you in any way. I think to encourage people to have the strength to leave is easy for me to say, because I did it. I did it eventually, but I really had to be pushed into the situation. So I don't want to sit here a total hypocrite. I just think that people need to understand that even when it seems like there is absolutely no alternative, there's no way for you to even exist outside of those circumstances, trust me, there is always a way. And there are groups, and I work with a Christian group now, the Knights Templar, and we offer help to women and children who are in circumstances that are, somewhat similar to this. We've helped women in the past, and there's always an alternative. And the whole point of this manipulation is to make you feel like you can't get out. That is the entire point of it. And so all I would say is, there is a way. You just need to go to someone that you can trust. And look, the stuff that happened to me is subject to an ongoing police investigation. So it's not that nobody cares. I think we have this misconception in this country that everyone's ignored, and it does feel that way, right? Because we can report a crime and then the police are like, oh no, we can't answer that crime. But then if you put something on social media, they'll come and arrest you in your living room, so we do sort of feel like, okay, if we get burgled, there's nothing we can do about it. If we report, many women feel if they report a rape, they're just going to be ignored, or it's going to be suggested that somehow maybe they were at fault. And so I've never been asked this question, and I'm definitely not a good advocate for women that have suffered this. But first and foremost, all I can say is, if there's any help you need, I am here personally, and I would just try and help you whatever way I can. But find someone and tell them what's going on.
Yeah. And I think for anybody that maybe sees someone in that situation or can think that something's wrong, speak to that person, you know, find out if they are okay. Because I think when you find that, I have family members that have been through that. And I think when you find yourself in that situation, you isolate yourself and you put on a happy face and everything's okay. And I think sometimes if you see someone overly happy, maybe just check that they are actually happy and there's not something going on behind the scenes, because sometimes people are very good at pretending. And like I said, Jayda, on a woman-to-woman basis, I do feel for you, and I'm so glad that you got yourself out of that situation. You seem so much brighter now, and from what I've seen in the past. And I think it also has to do with the people that you're around. What is it they say, that the 5 people that you associate yourself with the most, you actually morph into them? And I think at that time, maybe tell me if I'm wrong, but you're around a lot of toxic people in your Britain First days, and the difference from what I see online from you then to now is massive. You seem a lot more calm and mature and just generally in a better place mentally, and that could be because you found faith as well. But you also seem so much more tolerant to Muslims these days than you were previously. And can I ask why that is? Like, what has changed from then to now?
So I completely agree with what you said, because hate begets hate. And the Bible says that. The Bible says, you know, live by the sword, die by the sword. And the principle there is, you know, if you immerse yourself in this culture of hatred, which so many people are doing. And I have to say, it's not real nationalism. Nationalism gets a really bad rap. People think of nationalism as this hateful ideology, and it's really not, because genuine nationalism is born out of a love for one's nation and one's people. It is not born out of a hatred for other people. That's not genuine nationalism. And I'm going to say something now, and I'm probably going to misquote this, but somebody said this far more eloquently than I'm about to. But there's a saying that we use in the Freedom Party, and we say we don't lock our front doors at night, because we hate the people on the outside, but because we love the people on the inside. And so that is, for me, that sums up genuine nationalism. But if you are around people that aren't following that, and they are just genuinely driven by hate, then you will find yourself in unfortunate circumstances. And it took for me to get out of those particular circumstances. And again, God has a plan. I can't attribute any of this to myself. I'm a Christian. I'm a Reformed Christian. I hold to the Calvinist ideology. So I believe that, I believe in covenant theology. I believe that Christians are part of the elect. We were predestined to be God's elect before the beginning of time, and we were going to receive the Holy Spirit through no work or reason of our own, because we're all horrible, lowly sinners, but just because by God's grace, even a horrible, lowly, and I'm probably the lowliest, a horrible, lowly sinner like me can be saved by God's grace. And so through part of my journey after leaving Britain First was a journey of faith. And previously I identified as a Catholic, although I never fully supported the Catholic faith and ideology, because it was never really fully pitched to me. There are a lot of things in Catholicism that are in the catechisms, and a lot of principles that aren't actually made completely clear. But I kind of went on this journey of faith, and the way I did that was to study covenant theology. So I studied the Bible from a puritanical perspective. And when I did that, I realized that I'm actually not a Catholic. I'm 100% a Protestant. I'm Reformed, a Calvinist. I don't really like the term Calvinist. Christian was a derogatory term that people used to use. So where the followers of Christ were called Christians, and that was a derogatory term that the Jews would use against the Christians. I think, the same way I expect people sometimes use the term Mohammedans about people that are following Islam. And so Christianity, we've adopted that because we're proud of our faith in Christ, and we do follow Christ. We do believe that Christ is part of the Godhead, a part of the triune God. But there's a term Calvinism, which I'm not particularly fond of applying to myself, because Calvin was, of course, a man, and so I don't follow. I don't label myself a Calvinist, but I do follow Calvinism, and I reform theology. And through that journey, I think my whole world perspective changed, because when you receive genuine redeeming faith, which comes, we believe, Christians believe, this is our whole belief system, is that we receive redeeming faith by receiving the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit changes our dead hearts and unregenerate hearts, and it changes it turns it into a heart of flesh and love, and we become regenerate in our faith. And the principle that I was speaking about earlier, whereby we are actually told that we, in John's gospel, we're allowed to judge people in righteous judgment because, by their fruits you will know them. And also we're told in Paul's letters to the Corinthians that we are to come out from among the disbelievers and be you not unequally yoked with people that don't believe. So in order to make sure we're not unequally yoked, we do have to judge people on whether they are faithful or not. And so, yeah, I think that whole journey really just changed my heart completely. And that's through no work of my own. That was absolutely down to God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Nothing to do with me. I mean, by his grace, I have no idea why I would, none of us are deserving of that, but me at the very least. But it changes your outlook. And I suppose in terms of Muslims, and again, I want to say this respectfully, because I don't mean any of this in a way that's antagonistic or anything like that, but there's an interesting principle that I read from the reformers throughout history, and the way they viewed Islam, which obviously came, quite a few years after Christianity, was they actually viewed it as a Christian heresy. And so when I say that, I mean that respectfully. I'm not sitting here saying you're all heretics, right? But I'm just saying that was the view. So the way the reformers viewed Islam was that you actually took Christianity and just had a somewhat distorted version of it. But we're not talking about like Hinduism, right? So I don't really like the term Abrahamic faith, because I think it's kind of farcical to liken Muslims and Jews and Christians. I don't think it works. But in modern day, there is a term Abrahamic faith which is used quite regularly. And so I guess the point is, and what the reformers were looking at, was that these people are following the Bible in some context. There are obviously, they've deviated in terms of, we believe in a triune God and you guys don't. But if you were to put that side by side with Hinduism or Buddhism, I mean, it's just there's absolutely no correlation whatsoever. And so respectfully, again, this is not being antagonistic at all, but I see we're all created in God's image, every single one of us. And I see Muslims as people who are following an ideology that isn't the right one, in my opinion. And I want them to come to Christ. And so I don't approach that with a hatred. I don't hate Muslims. I don't hate non-believers, non-Christians. I love them, and I want what's best for them. And I want everybody. And your heart is just completely changed when you become a born-again Christian. And when people used to talk about this stuff, like, oh, you must be born again. When I identified as a Christian, was a Catholic, but hadn't received the Holy Spirit, wasn't walking with the Lord, I didn't grasp what they were talking about. But now I do, thankfully.
Yeah. And I can understand that somewhat. I mean, growing up, I've always been a born Muslim, but I've always been practicing, but it's never been like, I've never been like this. Do you know? So I've never been like fully immersed into it. And it's not till I had my kids that really changed a lot of things for me and my husband. So I can understand somewhat what you're saying about your heart needs to be open to it. Your soul needs to be open to it, to actually accept your religion and study your religion and get to know your religion. And it's funny that you say about, wanting everyone to be Christian. That's the way Muslims feel. That's the way I feel. I want everyone to be Muslim. I want you to come into our faith. And it shouldn't be. And I don't understand where the hatred comes from that. Because that we both want the same thing. We both think that we're our religion is the true faith. We believe that Islam is the one true religion, and you probably believe that about Christianity, but that doesn't mean that we have to hate each other. There's a respect there of, you have your faith, I have my faith. If anything, Christianity is also it's in Islam. You know, we do believe in the Bible and the Injil that came before the Quran, and we do believe that it was altered, obviously, but we do believe that there were Christians, there were Jewish people, there were, you know, but all of them were originally Muslims, and then things got changed. So there's no hatred in that. It's just that everybody is different, so to speak, and I respect that. That's why, you know, you have that view of Muslims now, and I can understand why you have that view, because modern Christianity is monotheistic, and like we previously said, you know, as Muslims we feel like Christians should come to Islam. And I'm sure you feel the same. But I really do respect, I appreciate the respect that you show my religious community, and I think it's okay for us to disagree as long as we do so respectfully, and like I said, not out of a place for hatred. And I tell you what has warmed me a lot to you, Jayda, and that has been how outspoken you've been about what's happening in Palestine, because there has been so many people that have shied away from it, so many people that don't say anything, and I don't understand how you can ignore what is happening. But what are your thoughts about the current Israel-Palestine situation?
I just think it's horrific. I mean, we're living through a modern day Holocaust. Now, people don't like me using that word because they feel it, you know, you're not allowed to apply it to this, but this is a genocide. That's what we're living through. And actually, again, you know, there's a lot of ignorance, and I don't blame people for being ignorant in the West, because I do believe that there is a specific agenda at play within the establishment and the globalist elite who want to ensure that people aren't informed about these issues. And, you know, being a sister of Islam, you would know, I expect, more than I would have known about the situation in Gaza, because it largely affects your people, although my people are there as well. And they're being, I mean, the Palestinian Christians are probably nigh on extinct, you know. This is, it's just horrific. But I don't think even I really had a full grasp of just how horrific the situation in Gaza was. I remember at the beginning, I remember at the weekend on the 7th of October, seeing the events that had happened. I did a live show either the day after or the following day. It was on the 9th, I think, on the Monday, right? So I think it was on the Saturday night that happened. On the Monday, I did a live show, and I said, and my people were absolutely like dumbfounded. People were actually having a go at me and saying, I can't believe you said that. But I put a film out, and I said, like, just take a beat, wait, because this is not what it seems. And this is like 2 days in. So I nailed my colours to the mast immediately. And I said, this is not what it seems. First of all, there's no way that this was just some, you know, unforeseen, unprovoked attack. And then I tried to explain to people as best as I could, with the limited knowledge that I had, the circumstances in Gaza. And I remember showing people very early on a video of the Gaza Strip, which demonstrated just this, you know, you can't demonstrate unless you're there. None of us can imagine it. And we're so lucky. We're so fortunate. You know, sometimes you have to check yourself, right? And think, when you're moaning and you're whinging, you're feeling a bit sorry for yourself, you have to think, really? Come on. And, you know, I really try and live by that standard, because we are so fortunate to live where we do and be in a situation where we are free to worship our God. You know, we're free to live our lives. We're not living under constant oppression. I showed a video of the Gaza Strip, which demonstrated that this 25 by 5 mile long piece of land was basically an open air prison. And it is the most surveilled piece of land. The people can't get out. They can't get out by land. They can't get out by sea. If they go into the sea, there are automated drones and weapons that will literally fire at them in the water. If they try and make it across the land border, they'll be shot at. It's manned by humans. It's manned by technology. This is unbelievable in 2024, when we live in a world where equality and equal rights and human rights and, you know, everybody's got a right to love who they want and march through the streets dressed up as degenerates and expose themselves in the streets to children because that's part of their, you know, their belief or their culture. All of this is the culture that we live in these days, where we're told we have to accept all of this stuff that goes against our respective faiths. And then the whole of the Western world who push that degenerate agenda are just pretending that there aren't people in Palestine, people in Gaza who are literally being treated like worse than animals, caged. And so I really made a point of saying to people, you know, thank God you aren't in there. You just can't imagine what those circumstances are like. And And yeah, and then when I knew, I said, look, this is going to be used as an excuse to attack these people. And they've been under attack. Then it was 75 years, now it's 76 years. They've been under attack. And I explained as well the British involvement in all of this and the Zionist element, all of that. I mean, I really have, and thankfully my people are very open to the truth. I think it's because we're a Christian nationalist movement, and we therefore our faith guides us. And when you follow God, I think your heart is open to the truth. And I just made it my absolute. Because I was horrified seeing babies blown to smithereens, seeing men, women, and children having white phosphorus dropped on them, people being starved to death. And then, if I'm honest, Maria, the thing that upset me the most was the reaction of the people that I had previously been associated with, right? Because whatever your gripes are, you want this to be a Christian country, I want this to be a Christian country, I want this to be a predominantly white British nation, all of that stuff. I do not support genocide. I never thought I'd have to say those words, but I do not support the ethnic cleansing of people in their homeland, their historical, ancient, biblical homeland. And to see the reaction of people, and they didn't really care about what they were saying to me, but I got called everything, right? Even now, I get called Jihadi Jayda, which I think is hilarious, right? But they call me all sorts. They call me all the names because they're angry because I'm not shilling for Israel. But you know what saddened me was, wow, you people are hateful. And it's not everybody, but there are a lot of people that I didn't realize they had so much hate in their hearts that they would, just because these people are brown, just because these people are predominantly Muslim, but some of them are Christian. Some of the most ancient Christian sites have now been demolished. But just because these people are different, you want to see them wiped out. And I see this cheerleading and I think, wow, is that what people think? And then I've seen people's reaction. Is that what people think I think? Is that what people think I believe? Because I don't. And who does? What natural right-thinking person says, oh yeah, wipe out all of those people so that you can occupy their lands? It's just, it's the worst thing that we're living through. As I say, we're living through a modern day Holocaust, and the people that are denying it are Holocaust deniers, and they need to be held accountable. And I've called out everybody you can imagine, from my side of the fence and some on your side of the fence, because again, I don't want to keep coming back to him, but I remember seeing the reaction from some people that I was quite disappointed in. And I know that people like DJ Khaled's getting a bad rap, but rightly so. And even Andrew Tate in the early days, I remember there was some video of him in his Versace dressing gown. And this was a couple of days after the conflict. And I remember looking, thinking, I'm screaming about this. And there are other people that are like, I won't say anything. And a lot of that is because there's money in supporting the other side, right? Yes. There's no money in sticking up for what's right and doing God's work. There's money in waving that little blue and white flag and cheering on the mass murder of innocent people. So I'm pleased to say that there's not enough money on the planet to buy me, ever.
No, I agree with you 100%, Jayda. I think that is something that we can definitely agree on, is what's happening over there. And I'll be honest, for the first time in my life, I have been scared for humanity. And when I look at humanity and from a place of my faith, I understand why God has warned us that there is actually there's the devil down here with us. And there is. I do believe that there are some people that are definitely satanic, people from that side for sure. Because I don't know how any person, regardless of your background, can see tens of thousands of kids having their lives taken from them so mercilessly, and just sit on the fence, or even worse, like you said, being on this other side for money. Like you said, I can't, and no amount of money can do that to me, especially if you have children, especially if you are a mother or a father, or if you have family members. I mean, could you imagine? I mean, I don't know if you saw that poor man that had twins, went to register their birth and came back and they were gone, along with the mother. Like, they were just gone. And I just think that, and I think people that think that because we're Muslims, that's why we're shouting about it. No, if these kids were Jewish, if they were white Brits, if they were Chinese, I would feel the exact same about the justice and the humanity of the situation. I would shout about it just as much. But obviously, because the majority of them are Muslim and there are some Christians out there, it hits closer to home for us. You know, it does hit closer to home, and it's hard to watch them go through it. And because of social media, we see so much. I think in the past, when there's been wars and there's been conflicts, we've not seen it as much, as brutally, but because of social media, we've seen everything, and it's hard to watch. I don't know about you, but I really struggle to watch it. And you have to keep sharing, because if you don't, then you're just one of the ones that are silent and saying nothing, you know, because of just being difficult, because it's difficult. It is difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I've shed numerous tears over stuff that we've seen online. I mean, look, we know from the scriptures in the Bible that the world is going to get into a terrible state before Christ comes back and defeats the devil. And so we know there's going to be suffering. We know there's going to be persecution. As Christians, we are told we will face persecution. There's this weird this sect of Christianity, which was actually formed and pushed by Jews, which is this Zionist agenda, this dispensationalism, which talks about a rapture and all of that nonsense. Christians are told in no uncertain terms, we are going to face persecution. Jesus tells us, you know, if the world hates you, remember it hated me first. So we know that we're going to face persecution, and it's going to be bad. And if we look at the history, if we look at like the story of our apostolic fathers, the people that were that were martyred for their faith, then we should draw courage from that. And even like, you know, the Covenanters, people that in modern day history who have been martyred for their faith, we know that all of that's going to happen. But it's so difficult watching it in real time happen whilst we are living in relative luxury, really. And then I suppose there's no positive out of this, but the fact that social media exists, which I hate, by the way, I have to say, I think social media is a work of the devil, but the fact that it exists means that we aren't avoiding what's happening. We're being faced with it. And I have seen children, I can't even say it. You've seen it. We've all seen the videos. I share them. I don't spare people, because I think, I get people saying, well, why are you sharing that? Because you need to look at it. And it's the same reason I share pictures about aborted babies. You know, if you don't like looking at that, maybe you shouldn't support it. That's my motto. But I think there is this thing where certainly the youth of today, this standpoint that we have all been brought up with, whereby Israel's these oppressed people, and I think that card has been well and truly played, and it's expired. And so now, because the youth of today are a bit more switched on and they're seeing all of this in real time, I think that the tables will turn. But my fear is these people won't exist. I mean, I just don't know. I can't fathom what goes on in the minds of these elitists in power who are using my money, right? And maybe your husband's money, you know, taxpayer money to fund this. You know, I don't want my money being used to fund this. This is outrageous. And this is, you know, we've got a government that's against our people anyway, just taking the money off of the pensioners for the winter fuel allowance. They don't care about us. But it's not that they just don't care about us. They actively are killing and helping people kill others. It's heinous. It's heinous. It's unbelievable.
And it is, and we believe the same. We think this is a sign of the end of time as well, before, you know, Prophet Isa, Jesus, comes back. So we also believe the same, and that does put a little bit of fear in me. I'm not going to lie. But
it's going to be glorious. It's going to be the best. I mean, do you know, honestly, my sincere prayer is that the Lord returns in my lifetime. You know, because and I know that I'm saying this and you're thinking, well, you ought to be scared, love, because you think that I'm committing heresy, and I'm thinking the same about you. So you're probably thinking, oh, you shouldn't be wishing that. But with our respective faiths, that is the one event that I truly believe that you know, we are nearing that. I think the Bible says that there are specific things that are going to happen, but we have to be nearing it, because the Bible talks about sending strong delusions. God said in the end times, we're in the end times, we've been in the end times since Pentecost, but in the final days, he's going to send strong delusions. People will call evil good and good evil. And my goodness, isn't that what's happening? Like, there are people out there that think they can identify as a cat. There are men that think they can identify as women. You know, there are politicians at the beginning of this whole this genocide, this ethnic cleansing expedition by Israel. At the beginning of that, there was a politician in the UK who lost the whip because he spoke out and said we shouldn't be doing this. Imagine you can lose the party whip, you can be ousted from your party and lose your job effectively for calling to an end to a genocide. What time to be alive? So Jesus, come back. Come back soon.
I know it is a scary time, and I'm sure you know one of the main voices that are condoning and justifying, as well as sort of covering up the Zionist war crimes, is Tommy Robinson, who I'm sure you know very well. I know in your wilder days of activism that, you know, we just spoke about, that you had attended sort of EDL rallies, and you sort of know a bit about what he's about. And if I'm again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that he's sort of morphed British nationalism into being Israel first and UK second. You know, he's basically going with whoever pays the bills, like we said, whoever's got the money, and people are following him thinking that he actually gives a toss about them, which is really sad. What do you think about Tommy Robinson? How do you feel about him mixing nationalism with Zionism?
Yeah, so Tommy Robinson is a character. Stephen Yaxley Lennon has been used and was used concurrently with Nigel Farage to destroy the British National Party. Now, I wasn't involved in the British National Party. I was, in my younger years, as I said, I wasn't involved in politics, wasn't interested in politics, to be honest. Didn't come from a political upbringing, wasn't involved in it. But the British National Party did rise to prominence. It became a household name. It was gathering a lot of support. The leader at the time was elected to the European Parliament. They were winning seats. It was, you know, like local seats, council seats, and what have you. And they were making gains. They were making progress. They were making strides. And so the establishment, which is basically a Zionist just branch of the whole globalist agenda, the establishment created these two characters, Tommy Robinson, Nigel Farage. And when I say created, like, people often think, oh gosh, you know, this is a conspiracy nutter. Tommy Robinson didn't go to MI5 and get issued with his, here's your long coat and here's your fake moustache and now your name's Tommy Robinson and you've got to do this. It's not like that. Tommy Robinson was used by the establishment, just the same way that Nigel Farage was, to destroy the BNP, which was, you know, pushing ethnic nationalism, and that worked very successfully. UKIP basically dealt with the political side, which is the BNP, and then the EDL was to mop up all of the people that weren't particularly political, but they were involved in activism, and it worked perfectly. And so the English Defence League, Tommy Robinson created that, and within, I think it was a month, changed it to the English and Jewish Defence League. And this is open to public inspection. If you go onto Companies House, this is there. It's on my Twitter profile if you want to have a look. And so, yeah, this was an actual agenda. Like, this didn't happen by accident. Tommy Robinson himself is not that powerful that he could bastardize the entire British right wing, which formerly, if you go back to like National Front days, wasn't Zionist. You know, it wasn't. And it's remarkable to see in the last 15 years the complete bastardization of the British right wing, which is almost entirely now that mainstream element, which is Tommy Robinson, and that is Israel first. And it's, for me, it's like, okay, I'm looking at this and saying, well, this is like treasonous, right? This is obvious treachery. I mean, if this was like Nigeria, like, would these people be falling for this? I don't know, but it's a very sophisticated and very well-funded agenda that has hijacked the right wing and totally turned it in that direction. And what I didn't realize at the time was that when I was involved in right-wing activism, I was actually part of what we now call the counter-jihad movement, which sounds like it's just anti-Islamic, but actually the driving force behind it is Zionism, because what it does is it keeps everybody's focus entirely on Islam. Don't worry about the LGBTQPZ plus agenda that they're teaching your children. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about the fact that the Abortion Act over the last 57 nearly years has seen over 15 million people murdered in the womb. Don't talk about that. Don't talk about the erosion of Christian values in the home and the decline in birth rate and all of that stuff. Don't talk about any of that stuff. Just focus on Islam. And unwittingly, I was part of that movement. And then when I stepped out of it and started to notice, there were people in significant positions, and they all came from one sort of pot. Then I realized that this is actually an agenda, and it's so damaging. And I see now, even now, I see people, they've fallen for this hook, line and sinker. And the movement that I was involved in previously, Britain First, is no better. They're taking the shekel. Like, these people are all taking the shekel. And again, I'm not saying this in the sense that some Zionist has come along and said, do you want to be in the Zionist club and we'll write you a Zionist check and you've got to cash it at the Zionist bank? It doesn't work like that. No. But one of the mechanisms in which people are being paid for promoting this agenda is Twitter, or they call it X now. So they will monetize your content, and people who are pushing a specific agenda will receive a financial reward for doing so. It's as simple as that. And let me tell you something, I don't make money on the content that I put out. And I'm not looking to. Like, I've got hours and hours and hours of footage of me yapping on about Islam and the Islamification of the UK and the West and all of that stuff, right? I got all these confrontational videos that would probably get loads of views. Every now and then someone shares one and they get, millions of views, and I could pump them out all day long, and I could be earning a very reasonable coin from doing so on social media. And it's me, it's my footage. It's like, I own it, it's me. And I choose not to do so because I don't want to be involved in any way, shape or form in that disgusting cog that these people have all got themselves into. It's shameful. And anyone calling themselves a patriotic Brit that's involved in that, it's treachery.
It's a shame that there's still some people out there that don't see it. And I think that, and I don't mean to say that because, if I'm honest, until recently, I didn't know much about Zionism and how much it was involved with it until the sort of Israel-Palestine stuff kicked off. Now I know that it's really everything, right? It's, in my opinion, it's the most extreme, evil, dangerous, and powerful ideologies out there. And I just want to clarify that when I speak about Zionism, I'm not talking about all Jewish people. I'm not talking about Judaism as a religion, because there are plenty of non-extremist pro-Palestinian Jewish people, some of whom I've had on my show, that are not in support of Zionism and don't want that to represent them. But when I'm talking about Zionism, I'm talking about supremacist ideology. Like you said, it justifies stealing people's homes and land and wiping them out in the process, and then thinking that that's okay. And what surprises me, that there's Christians who promote Zionism. And it's clear what Zionists think of Christians and Christianity, and it's not good. And like you sort of touched upon earlier, I think I've seen and read things about Zionists adding things to the Bible, the Schofield Bible, I think, where they've changed things here and there in the early 1900s to introduce Zionist theories into Christianity. And as a Christian yourself, what is your stance on Christian Zionism? How much do you know about it, and what do you think?
I know a lot about it, and it's probably one of the greatest heresies that of our lifetime, known to me, certainly. And I've done a lot of research into it, and and actually the whole concept of dispensationalism, which is this Christian Zionist agenda, was something that two monks thought up in response to the early Reformation, right? So the church, in the church, when the Reformation was in its sort of infancy, these monks thought up this idea, and it didn't really grab immediately. And then there was a guy, Irwin, that was in the UK, sadly, and then John Nelson Darby, and these guys were used and promoting this complete distortion of Christianity. But basically, the way they did this, for anyone who's not familiar with it, the easiest way to explain how they did this, without going back but that's how it originates, right? It originated there, but the way it was disseminated into the wider population, and it's far more prominent in the United States of America, was a Bible that was created called the Schofield Reference Bible, which basically has the scriptures, and then underneath it's got these notes which are giving an explanation of what the scripture says that is a complete distortion of the truth. I mean, it's heresy, it's abject heresy, and it's so dangerous. And it basically clings to the idea that the Jews are the chosen people, and that there's so much heresy in there. They're saying that Jesus Christ is going to come halfway down and rapture up all of the Christians so that we won't face the persecution, and then Jesus is going to reign on the earth for 1,000 years, and in that time there's going to be Jews that are sacrificing animals, even though Jesus is the sacrificial lamb. So this is so offensive to God, and I mean, it's just, I mean, I feel so strongly about this abject heresy. But this the crazy element about it, which you've obviously just touched on, and I get why you're so like bewildered by it, is that it's Christians that believe this. It's Christians who, our Bible is very clear. There is one route to salvation. There are not two routes. We believe, biblical Christianity is covenant theology, and the covenant that God made continues. And the Israel of today, because Israel was destroyed in 722, Israel was destroyed, and the people were scattered. The temple was destroyed in 70 AD, and God's judgment was upon those people because there was a covenant with them, and they were told, the covenant was conditional. The covenant was, if you obey my laws and my rules, you will follow this route, this the only way to receive salvation. And they were covenant breakers. And so God's covenant extended out to non-Jews, Gentiles, and that was everyone and anyone who believed in him as the Lord, in the Lord Jesus Christ, as in the Godhead. And so that's the only way. And I'm saying this as a Christian. That is the only route to salvation. There are not two separate routes. It cannot be the case that people who deny Christ, the people who say that Christ is boiling in a vat of excrement, which is in the Jewish scriptures, the people that historically had Jesus Christ crucified, it cannot be the case that those people have a separate route of salvation. That's abject heresy. And so the fact that Christians are even believing this means that they are, in my opinion, like they're in real danger. I even question whether they're actual Christians. But the bizarre thing about this is, look at the population of Israel. I don't know how many Jews there are in the world, right? I did read the other day that there are X amount of million, but I mean, it's a small number in comparison to the amount of, say, American Christians or British Christians. Yet I think 90% of Zionists are Christians. So when you said earlier about, you're talking about Zionism and you're not talking about all Jews. No, the vast majority of the Zionists aren't Jews. They're Christians. They call themselves Christians. I don't think they can be. I don't think they can be, because they're denying the very principle of Christianity, which is we are saved by grace through faith. And that's it. And there's no other route to salvation. So I don't think they are Christians, but they're the ones that are pushing this agenda. And of course, that isn't what's spurring on Tommy Robinson. Like, that man, he's not pretending to be a man of God. That really would be pushing things a bit too far. But it must be perplexing. And again, it goes back to what we were saying right at the beginning, where white Brits would maybe have a tendency, or Western Europeans maybe would have a tendency to look at anyone who's calling themselves a Muslim and say, oh, well, that's a Muslim whatever, a Muslim groomer, Muslim terrorist. Well, the people that are saying, and you're, as you said, a lot of people that use the label aren't necessarily Muslims, right? They don't have, God, they're not following God in their heart. Well, it's the same with this. The people that are cheerleading for this agenda and this genocide, they can't be Christian. It goes against all of our values. We're not a pacifist religion by any stretch, but we don't support ethnic cleansing. So it's just crazy stuff.
Yeah. And I think that one thing that Muslims and Christians have in common is that the grounds of, that evil is Zionism, evils of Zionism. I think we definitely have that in common. And obviously with everything that's going on in Gaza as well. And it would be good it's good that we're on the same page, and it would be good to know that that we are all on the same page and that we support each other and that we come together to fight this evil, and that's probably wishful thinking on my part, but that is what I would sort of hope for, is that we don't want Zionism taking over our religions and us as well, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think in terms of our religions, I think we're safe. Well, you're definitely safe. I don't think you've got any danger of Zionism creeping your faith. With mine, again, it's very clear for us. We are not told that everybody that makes a profession of faith is a Christian. We don't buy that. That's not our line. So these people that are calling themselves Christians, well, again, as I said, by their fruits you will know them, and I don't see any sign of that. So it's a distortion of my faith, which I really find very distasteful. I would rather they didn't call themselves Christians. They just kind of created some subsect of something. But here we are.
Yeah. I want to sort of move on to the topic of immigration, which I know is your favourite topic probably. It's a very heated topic of discussion here in the UK and in the US somewhat. I know that a lot has happened in terms of civil unrest up and down the country with the UK riots. And personally, if I'm honest, I think illegal immigration causes problems and people should be screened before they enter the country. And, I've got two little girls, I've got 2 children, and their safety is my primary objective. So that's why I say that. But I also feel, and you touched on this earlier, is that we need to get hooligan culture under control in the UK, again, for everybody's safety. And I think blaming certain communities, it doesn't achieve anything. I think it's the British government that, that have policies in place and that are responsible. And I'm not one to correlate colonialism or slavery with immigration unless someone tries to make it an Islam only issue, because if we play that game, then if we play that oppression Olympics, then how far back in every single culture are we willing to go? But what are your thoughts on immigration in the UK, and do you think that people from other religions and races who are born in the UK are British?
So my thoughts on immigration are that illegal immigration should be treated like every other act of criminality. We wouldn't expect the law enforcement, the police in our nation to allow people to break into our house. Now, I say that loosely because these days they do say that they're rather busy, but there are laws in place for a reason. And so illegal immigration, by its very concept, by its very nature, should not be permitted and it shouldn't be encouraged, but it's being encouraged. And I suppose I have 9 godchildren. And you have children, and just woman to woman, we can say that I expect we can both agree that the majority of the people that are coming on, let's deal with the boats, because the boats is the biggest issue that's being pushed into everyone's face, even though it's nowhere near the biggest issue, but it's being pushed into everyone's face for a reason. Of course, the government want this push in everyone's face, but the majority of the people coming in on those small boats that are crossing the channel illegally from France, which isn't at war, so it's a safe nation, so they shouldn't be doing that. They are, in the majority, they are fighting fit aged men, and there's not a great deal of women and children with them, and they are being sort of offered financial reward for making that trip. And then at the same time, so of course, and at the same time, the government and the branch of the government, which is called the mainstream media, but they are just a branch of the establishment, they're pumping out propaganda which is really enraging everyone. Another 400 migrants crossed the channel today, and look at the free televisions that they get in. And I read a story the other day where a block of flats has been refurbished, and the government have refused to tell the taxpayers how much all of us, everyone who lives in Britain that's paying taxes, how much we have all had to pay to put flat screen televisions and satellite TV into these brand new flats that have been given to people that have illegally entered the country. You're just like, what? You just took the money off of the pensioners. So by its very nature, illegal immigration shouldn't be allowed, because, there have to be rules. You can't break into someone's country any more than you can break into their house and say, oh, well, I wanted to get into your bed. That's my bed now. It's ludicrous. But that is being used to distract everybody, the boats, because the reality is that the government, which was a conservative government in name only, last year granted 1.4 million visas. And those visas, every single one of them allowed up to 12 family members to join. So 12 members of one family. So you're talking about a potential of 16.8 million people in 1 year that were lawfully invited, come and live with us. And the majority of those people now we're seeing are Indian. there's a real push to import a lot of Indian people into the nation, which, you know, we had an Indian unelected prime minister, and we got all this weird alliance with India and Israel and the Zionists and all of that. I don't know, it's crazy stuff. But, you know, so I am against that. I'm against that principle, because for me, even 1.4 million people, even if they didn't bring anyone with them, that is a huge portion of our population. Absolutely huge. And so naturally, it's concerning me. When people come to me and they say, what's the plan? You know, why are they doing this? Why would they possibly do this? Why would they let these people into the country and we don't know who they are? It's putting everyone at risk. Well, it's not putting them at risk, is it? They're not going to live next door to you and I. Like the elites aren't going to live next door to you and I. The new people that are coming in, they might be living close to you and I. They might end up going to the schools that your children and my godchildren go to, but they're not going to go to like Eton, right? So I think the elites just don't care about. It's like Hunger Games. They're just playing 3D chess with us all, and it's a game to them. As long as they are stuffing money into their pockets, they don't really care. But we do also have to acknowledge. So the real thing that I try to explain to people now is the actual enemy isn't even the people that are illegally coming into our country. I'm annoyed with those people. I'm really angry that they're doing it, because it's like, this is my country. Like, you're not invited in. You don't have any right to be here. And I know you're going to come here and we're going to end up paying money for you. And that does anger me. But it isn't their fault.
No.
There's literally pages on government websites telling people, if you seek asylum in the UK, this is what you'll be entitled to. I mean, this is madness. And so, going back to the riots, we saw these horrific attempts that people made. And I live in Northern Ireland, so I know that when there's a crowd and there's riots going on, people can get carried away. Yeah, I know that that's something that can happen. But I watched almost in real time people attempting to set fire to hotels that were housing these illegal immigrants. Now, I don't want these people here, and I'm worried about who they are. I'm worried about their intentions. I'm worried about the effect that it will have on our communities. I'm worried about, you know, all manner of things. But I do not support anyone who thinks it's okay to set fire to a building with human beings inside of it. I mean, that was insanity. And it was like, what possessed? Well, again, you know, you had people like Tommy Robinson looking into a camera, screaming, you have to rise up. Men are going to rise up. We have to rise up. And then you got Danny Tomo saying the same thing. Every town or city needs to go up. These are all kind of right-wing talking heads that whipped everyone into a frenzy from the comfort of their lounger with their strawberry daiquiri, right? And now people are serving like 9 years in jail.
I know.
Rightly so. If you try and burn down a hotel, rightly so, you should go to jail. Because also, I mean, not that it matters, but if these people are just coming from a pure racial element of they were willing to go to jail to try and kill those migrants. Well, what about all the people that were working inside? What about the white British women that were working inside on reception? You know, like, what about those people? There's no logical explanation other than just pure unadulterated hatred. So I think, but all of this stuff is being pushed at us, at white Brits, and we're getting angry, and people feel helpless and they feel hopeless and they don't know what to do. And then at the same time, they've got these blinkers on because the right wing's been bastardized by the likes of Tommy Robinson and Britain First. And so what they're not doing is they're not focusing on the main problem, which is the erosion of our actual traditions and values. We are a Christian nation. We do have values that include the family, you know, large families, marrying young, having lots of children, having strong communities, church communities. We've abandoned all of that. We've become very individualistic. We've become obsessed with money and fame and nonsense. People on social media now think that they're famous. It's just nonsense. It's all nonsense. And so, and our birth rate is at a catastrophic low. So, and at the same time, 1 in 4 pregnancies are aborted in the UK. I mean, I keep saying to people, let me tell you something. It is not the Muslim population that are going for those abortions, right? So, you know, there's all of these different factors that people feel helpless, but they're not being given the tough love, which is where I come in and the Freedom Party come in. Because we say to people, you're responsible. If you go and burn down a shoe zone because some girls got stabbed in Southport, then you're a moron. If you are more interested in going to watch a football than community activity or defending people in your own community, then you're the problem, right? If you're not getting married and having children, if you're saying, no, I want to be LGBT or whatever mad agenda of the day, or just degeneracy, promiscuity and all of that, we have to take responsibility. We have to, because it's gotten to the point now where immigration has become this thing where it's like, you guys, like Muslims, for example, Muslims are the main focus. They're the biggest threat because, and we see this kind of statements like they're breeding like rabbits, they're breeding like rats. And I'm sorry to say that, but this is what people are saying online. And I'm like, because that's the natural thing to do. Like, maybe if white Brits started to do that, we wouldn't be so worried about these people because we wouldn't need these people. But frankly, we've got like over 15 million people missing since the Abortion Act came into play. And those people, ironically, I think God has a sense of humor. I think we are under God's judgment, this nation. And I think that God's judgment does include the fact that the approximately 15 million people that are missing because we've murdered them in the womb have been replaced with people from other lands. And I don't think that that's a coincidence. I think all of this is God's judgment. So immigration is a massive, massive problem, but it's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is the total decline in us, in white Brits reproducing. And if only white Brits could wake up to that fact, but they're being so distracted by the other stuff. And you asked about people being British. I mean, I don't believe that people from other lands can be British. I think that, now I say that, let me just qualify that. I understand, I'm not daft, so I understand that Britishness is actually a construct. And so technically, yes, you can be British. You can be given British citizenship if you are from, say, both of your parents are Kenyan, and they came here and you were born here and you were raised here and you've got a British passport and a British birth certificate and you're classed as a British citizen, then yes, technically you are British. But I don't believe that just because something is under a legal framework that it's right, because it's also legal to abort babies in this country, and that is obviously wrong. So there are times when the law hasn't got it right. And I think that in these circumstances, this definition of Britishness for me applies to the indigenous peoples of Northern Ireland, Scotland, England, and Wales. And I think that they are the true Brits, but I do acknowledge that there is a system. And I said this actually to Dilly, because we said, we spoke to Dilly a few months ago. At the same time, there's all this stupid rhetoric on social media. These right wingers, they're so stupid, honestly. They have to go back. They have to go back. We have to go back. We're going to send you back. It's like, yeah, all right, mate. How are you going to do that? How are you going to round up all these people and go, listen, mate, we know that you've been here for 3 generations. Yeah. And you own loads of property and you got a business or what have you, but we're going to send you back. It's just, it's absurd. This is coming from again, the government are literally importing millions and millions and millions of people in, and these right-wing talking heads are implying that somehow, because they're stamping their feet on Twitter and going, you have to go back, that somehow you guys are all going to be told, listen, you see all those riots the other night, it's evident that those 300 people are, really not happy with you being here, so would you mind just getting your kids and your husband and just getting on the boat and going? It's just madness. It's moronic, right? It's moronic. So, and I said to Dilly, I wouldn't be so cruel as to say to someone like yourself or to Dilly when we had a conversation that people that this is all they've ever known, this country is all they've ever known, they don't necessarily identify as Brits. I asked him what he identifies as, and there are people that would say, maybe perhaps given just a random example, but someone might say that they are a Bangladeshi or a Bangladeshi heritage and a British citizen. And I get that. That's a construct. But I think if both your parents are Kenyan, then you're a Kenyan. Just if I was born in Nigeria, but both of my parents were Brits, I wouldn't be a Nigerian. I just don't believe that. I don't see it, because also biblically, God created nations. He actually created nations and gave us respective nations. So none of that is. I don't support any of that. But I do think that this notion that people. Well, it's just the fact that people are even imagining that saying on Twitter, you have to go back, is going to have any kind of, it's just what kind of world do we live? We live in a computer game, don't we? We don't live in the real world. It's just nonsense.
No, and I mean, there's points there where I agree with and I don't agree with, Jayda. So I agree with the whole illegal immigration. And I think when it comes to all these people coming on boats or visas being accepted, again, I think it's the British government that need to deal with that. I don't think it's the average Joe on the street, like you said, that they should be attacking, they should be attacking people illegally and attacking hotels. I think everything should be done legally. And I think we should find a way to get these people back, or get these people to somewhere safe, or find a different way. I don't know what the solution is, because some of these people that come from nations that have been destroyed, by Western nations. They're coming here because...
And I get that, right? And I'm not, I didn't touch on it, but I absolutely have been saying to people for a very long time now, you have to look at the bigger agenda, which again goes all the way back to Zionism, would you believe?
Yeah.
But the destabilization of the Middle East has resulted in vast waves of migration, and a lot of these people are hostile. And like, for example, at the beginning of the Palestinian attack, the attack on the Palestinians in Gaza, I said I'm against this conflict for a number of reasons. First of all, because I'm a Christian and I don't support genocide. Genuinely, that's the first reason. But also because this could drag us all into a world war, and I don't want that. And also, and this isn't the main reason, but a byproduct of this could be, if they are lucky, if they survive it, the mass displacement of like 2.3 million, we know there's a lot less now, but 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza, the mass displacement of them. And let me tell you something, they will be coming to Europe. So, be careful. And that isn't the reason to be against genocide, obviously, but for the far right who make that their whole, their MO, maybe that's something they want to consider. If you cheerlead for the displacement of 2 million people, then don't be surprised when they turn up on your doorstep. And when they do so, you have to keep in mind that you've been cheerleading and your government has been funding the ethnic cleansing of their people. There are young lads who have got their parents who are orphaned. They've seen their siblings die, and they've seen their mother die. They've seen their father die. So our constant meddling and chess, 3D chess, Hunger Games in the Middle East has not escaped my attention, believe you me.
Yeah.
I know it's a factor.
Yeah, definitely. And the part that I sort of disagree with is that people that are born in Britain not being British. So obviously, you have the right to that opinion and you express it so respectfully. But let me tell you a bit about myself and my family. So my family are 5 generations deep in the UK. So my kids are actually the 5th generation in the UK. My great-granddad came here after World War II legally. He was invited over around 80 years ago. My great-uncle was in the UN and was married to a white British woman. She converted to Islam. Their kids are my aunties and uncles. And a lot of them actually went on to marry non-Muslim white Brits, and some of my cousins look like you. We're all considered family, and my husband's grandfather actually fought in World War II for Great Britain, and we consider this our home. So I actually know the UK better than I know Pakistan. So my heritage is Pakistani, shall we say. And I get asked this question. I used to work in resale, and I used to get asked, where are you from? And initially, my initial reaction would always be, I'm Scottish. I'm from Glasgow. And they would go, no, where are you from? And I would go, oh, right, they're doing that thing where they want to know where I'm from. So I'm like, right, okay, so my grandparents came from Pakistan, and then my mum and dad were born and brought up here. I am one of those sort of rare Pakistanis where both my mum and my dad were born here, brought up here, went to school here, went to university here and everything. So we are very, very westernized. We're very, very British. We're very immersed into UK. And I actually find me and my husband are trying to sometimes take a bit of the British culture out of us so that we don't put so much of it into our kids. And we actually, for the first time, I went to Pakistan this year with the kids and my husband, and I'd never been. So I understand where you're coming from. And I definitely do, but I do consider myself because I know this is all I know, do you know?
Yeah, and again, that's what I said to Dilly. Like, I understand that even though I don't think, I know that you're British under that sort of construct of Britishness, but you're not indigenous to the British Isles. So I think no matter what, well, how did you find it in Pakistan? How did you feel? Because for me, I'm Northwestern European, so I'm a bit of a mixture. Part Irish, part Dutch, part English. I can go to parts of Ireland and feel like I'm home. I can go to, I absolutely love England. I grew up in England. I love it. And again, I can go to Holland, but I could basically anywhere through sort of Northwest Europe. I feel at home. But we do have a lot of, different cultures, and, the French, we won't talk about them, but you know what I mean? So, but I wonder, like, did you feel a connection in Pakistan?
No, of course. I think the other thing is when we went to Pakistan, so all my family are here. So I have no family in Pakistan. Like I said, my grandparents, my grands, brother and sister were here. They've all passed away now, but everybody I knew was here. So I never had the reason to go. But my husband's family, so my mother-in-law's family, all her family are there, her brothers and sisters. And when I went there, I'm going to tell you, I was scared. I was scared for one thing, safety. Two things like, going to the bathroom and having a shower and stuff, because I was just like, how do they, because I'm so used to just British, just being the luxury that we have here. But I enjoyed it. I loved being there. And it was because the people, we knew everybody, you walked around. I mean, it's not as free over there for women. So obviously I'm used to going to Tesco here, just going out and taking the kids to a baby class. But over there, obviously I need somebody to be with me. I can't go about myself. I can't drive there because the driving is insane. So, but I did feel like I was happy there and I loved being there. But we had this conversation with my husband. We would never move there. And I think...
and I get that, right. And this is what I was saying to Dilly, is that I wouldn't be so cruel as to say to someone that's in your situation, for example, that somehow the fact that you're here is your fault, or and that you need to go somewhere that you're not familiar with. I do think that it would benefit our country. I think that I do believe that people prosper, general, and I mean a peoples. So I think people from the Middle East belong in the Middle East. I think people from Africa belong in Africa, and I think that people prosper within their own community, because we're all practicing our respective faiths. We've got our respective cultures, and the cultures are very different. And like you say, you become very westernized, and you've actually probably now realized, I mean, I hear this from a lot of people, Muslims especially, saying we're conscious of the fact that we're becoming westernized and we don't want to become too westernized. Because I mean, I don't like Western culture. It's degenerate. That doesn't reflect on Christianity. This is just some construct, Zionism. But so yeah, I wouldn't be so cruel as to say, oh, you have to go to Pakistan. Like, you've never known Pakistan. Like, I'm not. And also, I understand that, like, your family came here by invitation, and so because there's a lot of rhetoric that gets used in the mainstream media and the right wing, and a lot of the stuff is the word invasion. This is an invasion. These people are invading our lands, and then they're breeding like rabbits. And it's like, well, they're not invading. You didn't break into my country. Your grandparents or your great grandparents, they were here by invitation, because let's face it, there was no other way for you to have your ancestors to have been here. There was no other way. You couldn't have just snuck in. Like, this country wasn't this whole crazy stuff crossing the channel. It wasn't happening then. So it was only by invitation. And of course, there was the British Empire and all of that stuff. So I get all of those nuances. And when I say that people aren't British, it's not because I'm being derogatory. It's because my brain is set in a nationalist way. And Christianity is a nationalist ideology, not a hateful one, because nationalism isn't hate, but it is a nationalist ideology. God did create nations, respective nations for respective peoples. And there are clear examples in the Bible of how economic migration is not promoted. And the consequences of economic migration have been horrific in several circumstances, very well-known stories in the Bible. And we've also seen clear examples, including Abraham considering a suitor for his own son, where people have been told not to marry outside of their own people. For what I would say are obvious reasons. So, I do think that we are best off with our own people. But I absolutely understand the situation that you're in, and I get it. And it's a difficult one, because this is all you've known. I wouldn't want you to feel in any other way. I would, especially like you're wearing this, and there are going to be people that might say, "Oh, she shouldn't be here because you're wearing it." I mean, I personally, I don't veil to that extent. I wear a mantilla when I'm praying. I have certain issues in terms of like security and not being able to see who people are and that kind of stuff. I have genuine concerns about that. But by and large, if you're happy if you're happy in who you are, and you seem to be, and you're happy with your attire, and you're happy in your tradition, then that's, who am I to meddle? And like, we see all these people at the moment in the West, and they're outraged by what's happening to the women in Afghanistan, and it's just like, why don't you get your own ducks in a row before you start worrying about all these other cultures? So I get the whole situation, but I do think that the merger of cultures and the merger of peoples ultimately is not a long-term workable plan. That's my worry. And I don't know how you feel about that. I don't know if we sort of agree on that, but
yeah, I think, well, in terms of wearing the hijab, I mean, it's not been a lifelong thing. It's been a very recent thing since I've had my kids. So for a majority of my life, like I've said to you, I've always been Muslim, but maybe not as strongly practicing. So I've been through I've seen, there's been people that have thought that I wasn't Muslim, I wasn't Pakistani, I am quite fair skinned. People have assumed that I'm from different cultures. Some people have thought I'm Spanish and things like that. So, I can understand what you're saying. And I think that for me, one of the reasons we didn't want to move to Pakistan was because, things like the freedom for me to go out and about, things like, driving a car, and it is a third world country. So, we're used to a sort of luxury here that maybe we don't have there. Food and things like that, our kids and stuff like that. But I think for here, for the UK, it's modern UK culture that bothers me now. And I know you touched upon the same thing, and we probably both have the same issues, with you being a Christian as well. And I think that if you were born and raised in Pakistan, I would consider you Pakistani British, because you know the land, you know the people, and the culture. And I'm guessing you would probably think differently. So let me ask you, what if there was a Pakistani born in the UK that was an ex-Muslim and became Christian? Would you then consider them to be British? So they're Pakistani, but they're Christian because they weren't.
Right? No, because I think that race and ethnicity are totally different to religion. Totally different. And to flip this round, and again, this is something that Zilly and I spoke about, to flip this round, when all these people online are saying, oh, you have to go back, my thinking is, because I was asked this, well, what about the white Muslims, right?
Yeah.
If there is this mass exodus of Muslims from the United Kingdom and they go back to their ancestral homelands, do they take the white Muslims with them? Now, my belief is no, they don't. Of course, as I understand, the Islamic belief is they're your people, right? They're your people, and so they go where you go. But my belief as an ethno-nationalist is no, they don't. You can't. I wouldn't expel a white Brit, because where would you? Because that rubbishes the argument, and this is how you can tell when someone's not a real nationalist. Because genuine nationalism is just a thought process that when you apply it, it means people of a specific nation or a specific heritage. So people who are born to two Pakistani parents are a Pakistani, no matter where they live. If they live in China, they'd still be a Pakistani. They wouldn't be Chinese. And that's the genuine thought process. So when you start hearing people say, oh yeah, all the white Muslims have to go, the white British Muslims have to go because they're traitors, they're not nationalists. They're just hateful. They just don't want you guys here. Now, that is a separate argument. Like the Islamification. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that it's not the religious issue. I'm talking about ethnic issue. Now, again, that does beg the question. People say, well, who would you rather then? Do you want all these white Brits who are degenerates? You want to keep them? You want to? Would you really want to keep like those people around you? Because obviously there are a lot of people that have been totally Westernized. I'm not just talking about Brits, but in the West, we've got this horrible degenerate culture that people have immersed themselves in, and unfortunately, that is the case. But yeah, they're my people, and all right, they might be some poor examples of my people. We're all horrible, lowly sinners. I'm not judging anybody, but there are some people that are lacking in decorum, let's say. But my people are my people, and fundamentally, I know that we can do better if we embrace our own culture and traditions and heritage. So that's where I hope that just sort of clarifies that I really do mean on an ethnic level. It's not about your faith or anything like that. I just think that people that have two Nigerian parents are Nigerian and they're not British. And I can't imagine. I mean, but then I haven't lived in your circumstances.
Yeah,
so like
no,
you said,
and I agree. I do agree because, yeah, I agree in somewhat because I am Pakistani. I'm Pakistani first. I'm British second. I embrace.
Do you feel that?
Yeah, because I embrace Pakistani culture, but I have family members or I have people that I know of that are embarrassed of Pakistani culture because they are so immersed in Western culture. So there are two sides of the coin, and it depends how you grow up. It depends how you think about your culture. But for me, I love my culture. I think it's an addition to who I am, and I want to put that into my children. I want them to learn the language. I want them to, know all about their culture, but mainly about their religion, because religion and culture are two different things. Sometimes people can mix them together. And speaking of that, I think sort of modern culture in the West, it sort of undermines the basic religious morality. So I think modern culture is sometimes, is it Christianity? Is it not? But why do you think Christianity right now is in crisis in the West? Because as we see, a lot of people are using Christianity, but like you said, they're not actually Christians, or you wouldn't classify them as Christians.
Yeah. So this narrative that people are using, it's not just you that's saying this. There's a guy on social media at the weekend I think it was on Sunday, and he's a right-wing commentator, and he posted a video that a Muslim guy took in London, on Mitcham Lane in Streatham. I know it well. And there's a mosque, and all the Muslims were coming out of mosque on Friday after the Friday prayers, and the Muslim chap was filming, and he was saying, look at this, thousands of Muslims pouring out the mosque, thousands of Muslims, now look at this. And then he filmed the church. I think it's the Holy Martyrs Church, if I'm not mistaken, but the church is 2 or 3 doors along. And he's like, look at it, it's closed, it's empty. Christianity is dying and Islam isn't. And a white British right-wing account posted this on social media. And I was like, hold on a minute, this is totally disingenuous. Christians don't go to church services on a Friday. We go on a Sunday. And I posted up a picture of the newsletter, right? Because I was like, no, this is not, I mean, I get it, right? I get there's this kind of competition going on, and I'll get to that in a minute, but this is propaganda and it's nonsense, right? So let me just dispel this myth. So I put up a copy of the newsletter for that week, and because in church news, I've been going to church for a very long time, so I know this. In church newsletters, it will say what the congregation donated in the collection box the week before, and they raised £2,500. And I said, you can't raise £2,500 out of an empty church on a Sunday. So there is this myth that that churches are empty and Christianity is on a decline. And of course, we absolutely have a problem with heresy within the Christian faith. And there's all these churches, like the liberal churches, that they're doing gay weddings and female bishops and female ministers, which is completely against Scripture. Scripture's very clear on this. 1 Timothy tells us that women are not to preach. We're not to usurp authority over men. So this is going against Scripture. But here's the thing that I think I can forgive you, and I mean this respectfully, but I can forgive you for not knowing this, but I can't forgive Christians for ignoring this fact. The fact of the matter is, Christians understand that there isn't some catastrophic decline in Christianity and the church that hasn't been preordained. We don't believe, going back to what we were talking about earlier, where I said, Muslims can ostensibly say the Shahada, declare themselves a Muslim, and then they're taken on their word. We know that in Christianity, God chose his people before the beginning of time. If we are in the book of life, we are chosen by God before the beginning of time. And so, yes, we are seeing a sort of mass conversion, if you like, of people from Christianity to Islam. This is a big topic that people are talking about. People are coming in their droves to Islam. It's the fastest growing ideology. People aren't attending churches anymore. The churches are liberal. They've bastardized the faith. Yes, all of that is true. All of that is true. However, I will say this, and this is more so for my Christian brothers and sisters that are watching. Never, ever feel disheartened by that, because We are told very clearly in the scriptures that we are chosen before the beginning of time. If it was God's will, if it is God's will and God's plan for us to be a Christian, we will not be missed. We will not be lost. We will not be taken. We will not find that someone who was predestined by God Almighty, the Creator, to be one of his people and have faith, saving faith in Jesus Christ, has accidentally been nicked by the Muslims at a Dawa stall. That's not possible. So everybody who is meant to be a Christian is a Christian, and everybody who isn't meant to be a Christian is not a Christian. And so now I didn't look at the world through that lens before I studied the Bible from a very puritanical perspective. I basically just studied biblical Christianity. Covenant theology, Reformed theology is biblical Christianity. Literalism, like, let's look at the text, see what it says. And that's what it says. So suddenly I looked and thought, and this would help people, I guess, you are not a threat to me. You are not a threat to me. You are not threatening it's not a threat to me that your people are converting my people. It's not, that's not a threat in terms of faith. There might be other cultural issues that are of concern and behavioral issues that are being attributed to your ideology. Those things are legitimate concerns, I think. But in terms of a decline in Christianity, there simply isn't one. God's will is being played out absolutely to the T. There isn't one hair on my head that shouldn't be there, and there isn't one on your head that shouldn't be there. And so I don't see this. I know the Bible tells us that we are going, that good is going to be called evil and evil is going to be called good, and people are going to be sent strong delusions, and that there's going to be war, there's going to be famine, there's going to be all sorts of degenerate, we're going to fall into this degenerate state. And I know that you and I both know this is happening because we're looking at it. You don't want your kids to fall into it. You're having conversations with your husband about making sure that you maintain your Pakistani culture so that you don't immerse your children in this Western culture, which is frightening. It's frightening, but it isn't Christian. It's not Christian. So there is, and I would forgive anyone for not understanding this, because unless you're a Christian, you probably wouldn't look at it through that lens. But this isn't our culture. This isn't what Christianity is about. I don't believe that this is okay. This degenerate behavior and all the rest of it. It horrifies me. But I do know that the elect, my people, my brothers and sisters in Christ, they will not be lost and they won't be missed. So it's fine. Everything's fine. It's as it should be.
Yeah, and I think we have a lot of crossover views from a religious standpoint. Like you said, the rainbow community culture trying to influence our children, the massive amount of Christian apostasy resulting in so much atheism as well, the rise in radical feminism where men and women hate each other. When the West was properly Christian, these things were not a factor. It was so much moral than it was now, and even now, I mean, we are looking, me and my husband were looking for Islamic schools up in Scotland. There's not many. And it was like, and I've actually been talking to other parents and they're actually considering putting their children into Catholic schools.
Yeah.
If the Catholic school will take them, because that's the closest thing to avoid all the degeneracy, like you said, is that's the closest thing they can have. Yeah. And a lot of them can't go because obviously you have to be baptized and things like that. But that is what, a lot of Muslims are now facing as well. Me and my family were actually planning to move to a Muslim country one day, hopefully soon, because we fear for our children. We want to we'll probably end up settling in one of the Gulf nations. I have family in Qatar and Saudi and Pakistan, but we'll probably end up settling there. But that is the issues that we're now facing. And a lot of Muslims, and I don't know how many you've spoken to, but a lot of Muslims are worried about staying here. And a lot of Muslims don't have anywhere to go, and they can see their children becoming Westerners, dressing differently, drinking, drugs, and all of that, and moving away not only from culture but from their religion. Just like a lot of, I'm sure, Christians have done the same. They're sort of moving away from traditional Christianity, shall we say?
Yeah, I get it. I've spoken to Muslims that have told me this. They said, we want to go. And again, I get that must be really scary for you, because this, I don't know about your husband, but I know that you've told me that this is all you've ever known.
Yeah.
So that must be a a big leap. I can't imagine ever leaving the UK even. I mean, I moved from England to Northern Ireland, and that was a big leap for me. But I'm a real nationalist. Like I love my country and I love my people, and I don't want to leave, even though it's falling into a state of utter just lunacy. It's like lunatics running the asylum. So I mean, and I sort of joked about this with a few Muslims that I've spoken to, and they said, look, this situation's gonna rectify itself because we're not sticking around. Like we don't want to be here. But if your lot could just stop destabilizing our lands, and again, this is another thing that I think people they overlook in the immigration argument when you've got all these people just screaming about, oh, we need to send them all back. Well, perhaps people might be more inclined to go back to their ancestral homelands if they weren't destroyed and if they weren't living under, threat of Western allied, Zionist forces, bombing them and killing them on a whim. So there's so many things at play, but I think we can certainly see eye to eye. I see this, and like I see people that call themselves Muslims, and I have my doubts, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know a huge amount about your faith. I know a relative amount, I think, but I see people that call themselves Muslims, and I think, I don't know, because I have actually found myself in speaking to people that would be considered, I would consider to be devout Muslims, and I remember somebody saying to me when Dilly and I first sort of linked up and he said about doing a chat. I kind of put the feelers out and was like, who is this guy? Like, what's his? Because I know there's different sects of Islam and all the rest of it. And somebody said, he's basically like the Muslim version of you guys. Like, so I'm considered a radical extremist Christian because I come at Christianity from a puritanical sense. So there's different denominations of Christianity, just like there are different sects of Islam. And this person's basically said, I think you two will get along. Because I think they said you'll probably be a little bit more extreme in some of your views, but I think you'll get along because a lot of what you believe, there's going to be overlap with traditional, I guess, like Orthodox Muslims, if you can use that term. There's overlap. Like we're both looking at what's going on in the liberal West, saying, "Wow, I don't want to be this. I don't want to be in this." Like, and the Bible tells us that we are to be in the world, but not of the world. Yeah. So we are not of this world. Like we're here for a finite amount of time, and then we're to spend eternity with the Lord. And so, but whilst we are here, we're here to evangelize people and spread the gospel, but also to remove ourselves from the wrongdoing of the world and the degeneracy of the world. We're not to get involved in that. So as much as you might feel like you need somewhere to go, I look around and think, this is desperate. And it saddens me as well, because it's my people. Like, so that makes me even more sad.
Yeah, and cultural Muslims are just as bad as cultural Christians. There's so many cultural Muslims now that don't know their faith and don't want to know their faith, and it is really sad. I just want to say a couple of super chats before we end soon. I've got a man that has said, keep up the good work you're doing. She's also said, Jayda, you're one of us, just say the Shahada already.
Well, I don't, if I could just quickly share this.
Yeah.
So there's in the Bible, we are told that once you receive the Holy Spirit and you become a genuine believer and you have redeeming faith in Jesus Christ, then it's impossible to fall away. So this is another thing that I was saying earlier. And you said like about the decline of Christianity, and I used to, before I had kind of like redeeming faith and I was walking with the Lord, I didn't really understand this. But there is a principle in Christianity, which is that once you receive salvation, you cannot lose it. Doesn't mean that you stop being a sinner. I sin every day, but I feel convicted. So whereas before I may have done things that I didn't feel convicted for doing, that now I think about things I've done in the past. I think about, sometimes I swear like an old sailor, it's terrible. I think, I shouldn't do that. Constantly feeling like the burden of the sin, which is good. It's a good thing. But there is a principle in Christianity that once you receive that redeeming faith and you're saved, you cannot lose your salvation, which again is why I'm not worried about where we are with Christianity, because I know that God won't miss any of us. If he wants us, we're his. So, but I do enjoy, I see those messages and I like them, it's kind of nice, because it's like it's just humans who I think take their faith very seriously, reaching out to each other. I would assume that person hasn't said that because they hate me. They probably said that because they, in some endearing way, they want what's best for me, which is a nice thing.
Yeah, and I'm sure that you would feel the same the other way around.
Yeah.
I'm sure that you would want us all to be Christians, and that comes from a place of love. It doesn't come from a place of hate at all.
Yeah.
T10 Gamer YT said, "Free Palestine, all brothers and sisters." Yes, brother, I definitely agree. And Disqualified Dad said, "Great conversation, protect the children." 100%. I think we can all say that we are worried for all kids, not just Muslim kids, but I'm sure that, Jayda, you're worried for your godchildren as well and how they will be, and hopefully they will be devout Christians, or they will become to Islam, but that they will be following a faith. And that's what we all hope for our children, is that they're safe and that they make the right decisions. I want to end the show on how we can move forward, because no matter what people think about multiculturalism working or not working, the reality is it's here. It's in our nation, it's in our country, and it's here for the foreseeable future. I don't see, like you said, mass deportations taking place, because it's virtually impossible to do so and ridiculous resource-wise. And the likelihood that a civil war would break out is probably what would happen. But how do you think that Muslims and Christians can live in the West in peace together, and can we unite over commonalities such as Zionism and generally how the country is running?
Yeah, this is something I've given a lot of thought to, because frankly, there's a lot of you guys here, and and you're not going anywhere. You're breeding like rabbits. That's delayed. So when I hear it, it's like, oh my gosh. But you have a birth rate that is significantly higher than the birth rate of the indigenous people. We are well below replacement level. Indigenous Brits, well below replacement level, which is 1.6, and we're like 0.7. I mean, it's over. Demographics don't lie. And I've been saying this to people, and they think that I'm crazy, but they're going to see, especially within the next 25 years. So the reality that we're faced with is there are lots of you here, and you are having big families, and you won't be the biggest. Well, we are set to become a minority in our own nation within the next 2 to 3 decades at most, right? Now, we won't be the smallest minority, but we will be one of several minorities. If you look at the trajectory, if you look at demographics, the Muslim population is growing exponentially, and you're having big families and what have you. And so I've given this a lot of thought, and I have considered, well, we have to find common ground, and we have to coexist, because what's the alternative? But there is genuine concern here. Now, at this point, because of the demographics, and because you don't form a huge portion of the population, despite what the right wing would say, the right wing, like, we've been taken over. And it does seem, I tell you why it seems like there's so many more Muslims than perhaps there are. I mean, there are a lot of you here. The government say that there are less Muslims than there are. Like, they do play it down. There are a lot more of you here. But the reason I think it seems so prominent is, A, because aesthetically, like your cultural clothing, it looks very different. And also because, irony, but you colonize, so to speak, right? Or you balkanize, let's say. So you stay in your communities because you don't want to assimilate, I guess. But I mean, I don't think assimilation is a good thing anyway. So if you go to certain parts of the United Kingdom, they appear to be predominantly Muslim, because you guys are all sticking together. You're living in your communities, you're praying together, you're all having lots of babies, you're looking out for one another. And so it looks like there's huge numbers of you. And so at this point, I've had lots of really pleasant conversations, and there's certainly a huge amount of common ground, especially with current events like, Palestine, for example, but also closer to home, the stuff that's happening in our country. I saw the Muslim parents that were outside the school that was teaching the LGBT a few years ago, and I was rooting for them. And I had right wingers like, I can't believe you're cheering for them. I was like, they're protecting their children from being taught about sodomy. Like, what do you think I'm going to do? Say, no, teach the kids. Like, this is mad. Why aren't you doing this? So there's a lot of common ground that we have. I'll be honest with you, I'm going to be very candid here. My concern is when that demographic shift happens, I don't know what's going to happen, because I can tell you from a Christian perspective, we are told that we are not to we are told that we are not to be unequally yoked. We are not to form a partnership, whether that be a romantic, so like a marriage or a business partnership or a close friendship with someone outside of the Christian faith. It's not to say that we're not to be kind to people, we're to love our neighbor, but we're not to form that relationship with someone outside the Christian faith. So let's just say that we find ourselves in a situation where there's Christian communities and Muslim communities, and I think we can have common ground on a lot of these, on fighting the degenerates, right, getting rid of all that filth and all the rest of it. But my worry is when the demographic shift occurs, what happens? And this is what I think people are looking to on a much probably more simplistic level than I've delved into it. But what happens? Because if you take a look at how Christians are being treated in predominantly Islamic countries, it's horrifying, and we can't ignore it. As much as I don't ignore what's going on in Gaza, we can't ignore what's happening to Christians in Nigeria, for example, that are living under what I expect would be classed as extremist regimes. But even on a kind of broader scale, I understand, I don't know if this has changed since I last learned this, but I understand that, for example, in Saudi Arabia, there isn't a mechanism to acknowledge Christianity as a faith, right? So if somebody leaves the Islamic faith and say converts to Christianity, there's no mechanism to recognize that. And so that's, Saudi Arabia might sound like quite an extreme example, but I was quite surprised to learn that the same applies to Dubai. So in Dubai, any legal framework that actually recognizes a Christian, because it's not a recognized faith, it's not accepted. Now, I actually do believe that we should have our respective nations and our respective faiths. We should have blasphemy laws. People should be forced to follow them. I believe all of that. But and I don't really have a problem with Saudi Arabia being very strict, or Dubai, because they're Islamic countries. And in an Islamic country, that's how it goes. If you guys want Sharia, you have Sharia. Like, that's why I don't get involved in all this stuff about Afghan and all the rest of it. That's not my gig. But what genuinely worries me is what happens with the demographic shift. If Muslims did become a majority or a significant power in this country, which I think looks very likely, and this is why people are quite concerned, is somewhere that's as developed as Dubai. So really, people holiday there. It's like this popular place, isn't it? Everybody's like, I've been to Dubai. All the influencers are out there and all that stuff. They don't have a legal framework that acknowledges the existence of a Christian. It's an offense. And in these countries, it's punishable. Being a Christian is punishable by death, because basically not being a Muslim, then you become an apostate. So this probably is a long-winded reply. You're probably thinking, oh my gosh, I wasn't expecting this. But genuinely, I don't know what that means in terms of coexistence. Because if that is how this is going to pan out, then what does that mean for us? Because in Christian scripture, we are not, it doesn't say we have to drive you out of our lands, but it says that we're not, but it also does discourage economic migration. So it would basically discourage, for example, I'm not picking on your family, but you know what I mean? It would discourage what happened there, right? But it doesn't say drive them out of your lands and all the rest of it. So we are being somewhat tolerant and saying, okay, we accept that you're not Christian, you're going to practice your belief, because our belief tells us that only certain people are Christian anyway. We can't inflict that on you. I can't make you be a Christian. Only God can do that. I could get you, there's no shahada, there's no prayer that I can get you to say, even to make a public declaration. So it's just down to God. So we are like, okay, well, if they're not Christ's people, then they're not Christ's people. But I don't see, in the reverse, I don't see that, and I don't know what that means for us.
Yeah, I think, if I'm honest, I don't think that you will be a minority. I don't see that happening. And maybe because I'm seeing it from an Islamic point of view, from Muslim, I do feel sometimes like a fish out of water here, even though there's so many of us. But I do think that if the Christians get their act together, which for you, I hope they do, I think that the UK can flourish, and they can become a great nation. In Islam, nationalism is forbidden. We don't believe in nationalism. And in terms of Saudi Arabia and Dubai, I think if you leave Islam and become a Christian and you're discreet about it, I think you're all right there. But yeah, I don't think if you were to shout about it and make a public declaration that it would be accepted at all. And the irony is that, in Dubai and Saudi Arabia, Christians are probably safer than they are in the UK. it's a very safe country. Dubai is very different because it is sort of adopting a lot of sort of Western culture in some ways. But I understand where you're coming from, because there is a lot of us, and yeah, I can see where it's coming from. But like I said, I think, you know, we've addressed the commonalities that we have in objection to certain things that both of our religions prohibit. And I think our struggle against Zionism is also the reason why we need to show unity. And that is why we need to get along. And I'll be honest with you, Jayda, the main objective for this show was to try and bridge that gap between the right wing and the Muslim community. And I think in a small way, we've achieved that. And we've achieved that we can all live together. We can have discussions. Doesn't always need to be a debate, can be a discussion. And we can think about ways that we can fight our enemies together rather than fighting against each other.
I like to think that before we're facing a situation where there might be such a drastic demographic decline that we become like subjugated in any way by anyone that's external. Because let's face it, I mean, let's just say, for example, that the population became majority Hindu, which is a possibility. With what's happening at the moment, the government are importing vast numbers of people from India, huge amounts. So let's just, look at what, I mean, I don't know if you're aware of the history, but the history of how Christians are treated in nations that are like by the Hindus is absolutely abhorrent. It's horrific. I mean, it's genocidal. So this is not like exclusively to Islam, but I do see these. I mean, that was something that concerns me. But I think that I'm hoping that Christ comes back before all of that. We don't have to deal with it. I think that if we look at what in the which is all we can do, because we're not here for a very long time, and we are here to make every day count. And as women of respective faiths, I know certainly I have a duty to preach the gospel and try and do whatever I can to witness to people. And I hope that my witness is showing people that my heart is actually purer than maybe I'd represented in the past. I think I've done very well at misrepresenting myself in the past. And I know that you guys have like Dawa and stuff, which is important. And so we're on our respective missions for our respective faiths. But in the current climate, there is overlap. There is a common enemy, if you like, as in the agenda, and that's pushing against both of our safety and our children's safety. And what I would hope is that people watching this, who I expect are probably predominantly Muslim audience, will also understand that the right wing, the genuine right wing, is actually probably quite small, because it's not these grift. I call them the grift right. Yeah, the grift right. Tommy Robinson, Lawrence Fox, Britain First. You know, the people that are just shilling. They're shilling for a shekel. They're pushing an agenda for a shekel. They are no better than the cultural Muslims, I guess, that you said, or whatever. They're people that are just lining their own pockets. So for those who do want what's best for our families, and that might be that you guys want an Islamic Britain, like I expect you probably would, because I think your book says you're to go out and spread Islam throughout the whole world, and we are to preach the gospel to the whole world. We're to do that. So no bother there. I get it. So that's not an offensive thing to me. But whilst we're on that journey, I do think that there is definitely common ground. And look, there's two options. I live in Northern Ireland. I live in a country where there was, I expect everybody's aware of the Troubles, and there's been civil unrest over, really, this spans back hundreds of years. And what it has done is it has formed a very tight-knit community in Northern Ireland of like British, like PUL, they call them, Protestant Unionist Loyalist community. And then on the other side of the fence, you have the Irish Republican Catholic majority community. And in Northern Ireland, we have marching bands that are attended by young men at least once a week. They go to practice, they march every weekend, they dedicate a huge amount of time, money, effort, blisters on their feet, you name it, all of that to this, because it's a tribal thing. They were forced to do so after years, hundreds of years of bloodshed. And so I know that the net result, now I'm not belittling the struggle, of course, but I know that the net result is people's sons dead, people's lives destroyed, homes destroyed, communities destroyed. And the bottom line is neither one of those two communities could shift the other. And we are talking about white Europeans. We're talking about two different white Europeans. So what I foresee in the UK is this longing by the grift right for like civil unrest and civil war. We need to look close to home and see what that might actually look like, and realize that it won't benefit any of us. It really won't. And you are here, and and God bless you. And and if we have common ground, that's not to say that we can't speak out and say we're unhappy about immigration. That's not to say that we can't speak out and say that we're unhappy about certain people in your community committing certain acts. And I also try and be very balanced and point out that there are wrong uns in every community. But we have to, we've got to get through this. And if we force our people into a situation where they're fighting at the behest of the government, really, because the government are the ones that imported all these new people into our lands, and they know what they're doing. Like, I just think that I think they're evil. I think they're absolutely evil, and I don't really want any of us dying to suit their little Hunger Games agenda. I just don't want that. So I hope that this has at least been interesting to people, at least.
Yeah, and just to finish up, I would say I wouldn't mind the UK if the UK was Muslim, but I would want all races to be together under that umbrella. In Islam, we're told to respect the laws of the land, even if it's not a Muslim country. And like we were saying, in most Muslim countries, if someone insults Jesus, Prophet Isa for us, they go to jail. So I would assume it would be the same in the UK. But like you said, I don't think it's the right way to go. With the hatred and everything that's been happening recently, I think we definitely need to stay together and help each other. I've just got one quick super chat again from Disqualified Dads. Wanted to say, Jayda, the destruction of Christianity started with the breakdown of the family unit almost 50 years ago. Started with the family court.
Yeah, absolutely.
Seems like there's a lot of issues with the family court recently as well. I know there has been. But yes, thank you, Jayda, so much for joining me. Thank you. I know it's been a little bit longer than I expected it would be. No, I really enjoyed it, and I really hope that we have bridged some of that gap, and I really appreciate you taking the time out to come and join me today. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a really good rest of the evening.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, and thanks for everybody who took the time out to watch. And I hope everybody has a good week. Everyone just stick close to God. Whatever your beliefs are, stick close to God, because there's a whole lot of crazy going on at the moment. But if we all just take a breath, and sometimes I think, take maybe a bit of time away from social media, just touch grass, you'll realize we're not actually, like, I think we've created these figures in our heads that everyone's bad and out to get us. It's not, we're okay. We're all right.
Thank you so much for everyone joining. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.